Hello and welcome to Lunch and Learn Wednesdays. My name is Jacob Falkenberg and I'm the Communications Director at Venture Portland. And today we're going to be talking about board member recruitment for business district boards. And also, once you've got them recruited, how do you make the most of their time? Some tips for running effective board meetings. So, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Great. So as I said, we're talking board member recruitment. As a volunteer-run organization, you rely on your business volunteers to handle the majority of the work for the organization, and people come and go. Businesses open, they close, people move, people term out. So it's always important to kind of keep a leadership pipeline going and think about ways to continue to recruit new board members. So all the work is not just left for one person, which we see happen time and time again. So these are some things to think about as you are building your board. So first thing you want to consider with board recruitment is casting a wide net. So thinking about your board as a representation of the entire district. So when you're looking at the members on your board, who's represented and who's not, and that could be the business mix. So if your business district has a lot of restaurants or retail or service businesses, um, are your board members restaurant, retail, service? Does the percentage of businesses and business board members kind of match the business mix? Does it include anchor businesses? So, those are your large destination businesses that your district is kind of known for. If not, that is certainly something you want to focus on as a target for your recruitment. But you also want to have small and large enterprises, a mix of business sizes and incorporating unofficial leaders in the district. Who has a history in the district that's known by everybody, that's trusted, that has relationships with people. Are they involved? Because they can be a great conduit to get other people involved. Also think about geography, right? If your district is, long north to south district, do you have an equal representation from everybody in the north, the central, and the south part of the district? Thinking about geographic representation as well. You also want to think about skill sets. So, what are people bringing to the board? You don't just want a warm body, you want somebody that has a skill that can be utilized by the board and can be used, whether that's if they have a financial background, they can help out with finances and budgeting and that sort of thing, or events planning. If you've got events happening throughout the year, they can be helpful for that. If they have a background in social media or web design, they can help with that. So thinking about what's currently missing as far as what needs to be done, and is there somebody in the district that you want to approach to do a specific skill to help out the organization? All in all, a representative board is going to lead to better programming and future leaders. People are going to be happier in their positions and they're going to stick around longer. Okay, so you also want to think about the most important piece when thinking about board recruitment is the fact that you have to focus on developing relationships. So you're not just approaching somebody right off the bat that you don't already have a relationship is right. You want to work on developing a relationship with them by inviting them to be a part of events, maybe having conversations with them to hear about their interests, about their concerns, about what's going on in the district, what's going on with their business. And then when the time is right, that's when you make the compelling and heartfelt ask. And usually the most successful asks are done face to face and by a trusted person. And by trusted person, this could be somebody that already has a history speaking with an individual or meeting with an individual, or it could be somebody that is in the same industry as the individual. So, restaurateurs connect with restaurateurs better than a retailer, right? Um, it could be somebody that's on the same block or, geographically close. So, they're seeing each other in passing because their businesses are geographically located close to each other. So those are the things you got to think about before you making the ask. Who's the most appropriate person for that ask? Also thinking about how you're asking. So it's very tempting to send out a bulk email to your entire list and hope that someone responds. But really, targeted face-to-face interactions are the most successful. So you want to think about how can their skills benefit the entire district? It's a people business. They'll want to learn about you, and you'll want to learn about them. So make sure that you have information about the business association. Make sure that you've got information about what the role on the board would be, and that could be like a board member job description that kind of outlines all the responsibilities and the time commitment, just so you're setting expectations so they know what they're getting themselves into. And we'll take a look at a board member job description in just a bit so you can kind of see what should be included in that. Um, but really, those targeted asks are the most important. What you don't want to do is add board members out of desperation. You don't just want a warm body. You want leaders or potential leaders, people who can lead, motivate, and recruit talented people, that have the ability to help to build your board, that work for the whole district's benefit, not just for their own business, but thinking about how they can enhance the entire community. How can they do things that, might not necessarily benefit their own business, but might benefit other businesses in the district? And are they nimble enough to lead the district through future changes? So, we saw a huge test with COVID. A lot of districts lost the majority of their boards because the people involved weren't nimble enough to adapt to the changing environment. Um, so, thinking about those kinds of leadership qualities are in individuals that you're approaching. And you want to make sure that the new leadership matches the future of the district. So if your district's been changing, build a board that embraces that change, not a board that's going to focus on just wanting to do the same thing year over year, whether it's been successful or not. You don't want boards that get complacent. That's why it's so important to have term limits on your board because it requires you to have turnover and you don't get stuck in a rut. And I think by getting new energy and new individuals into the fold, it helps you to adapt to the changing needs of the businesses and the business mix as that changes too. You also want to make leadership easy, so lower the barriers to getting involved. And that could be, starting them in a position where it doesn't require as much time or commitment or responsibility, and then allowing them to become comfortable and work their way up to a board role. So thinking about opportunities to have people participate, and that could be a middle ground between people who participate occasionally and then board members who invest a lot of time. So, is there a way that someone could serve on a committee before joining the board? Or is there, things that someone could do for your monthly meetings or events where they could just kind of participate in a single thing before officially becoming a board member? And that could be, updating the website or taking over the Instagram page. Is there a specific responsibility that someone could be approached to take on? Those are the short-term opportunities that build their experience, that build their confidence in wanting to become more involved with the organization. And then you want to identify potential leaders quickly. These are people who, once they join the board, could be a good fit for an officer role. And once you identify those individuals, creating a situation where they're able to maybe meet with the existing officers and start to shadow them. So when those officers term out or step down, you'll have a specific person in that leadership pipeline to step in and take on that role. But you will be able to identify, who's going to be good for the role and who won't but you don't want to hesitate because these are the types of people who will move on if they're not feeling like they are being heard or if they're not being engaged with. They'll find other opportunities for their volunteer time. So thinking about the leadership structure of an organization is really like a pyramid, right? You've got your president at the top of the pyramid, and then below that you've got your board officers, the vice president, treasurer, secretary. Below that person are your regular board members. And then below your board members are your prospects. The people who help out with specific projects or who are involved. Those are going to be your most likely candidates to move up into the board member role. Those people who are committee members already, or people who are involved with specific events or projects or tasks. Those are the people most likely to respond positively to being asked to become a board member. You've also got your prospects. So below the people that have already been involved with your activities, you've got your members. So those are already familiar with your organization and wouldn't require a ton of information to get up to speed as to what the organization does. And then below that, you've got your members who just pay dues. So you're not seeing them as much during activities. Your non-member businesses in the district who should be targeted for membership before even thinking about asking them to become a board member. And then you've got district partners. So this could be nonprofits in the district that maybe benefit from district activities, but aren't necessarily involved with serving on the board. So here's a kind of outline of how you should kind of think about cultivating your board prospects. Making a list is always super helpful, and including this information is going to help you kind of track where you're at. Are you at a point where you're ready to uh, ask someone to become a board member? So, for instance, this says, and you might not be able to read this because it's kind of small, but it says the prospect is John Doe, and then the next column says, what do they bring to the table? Why would we want them to be a board member? And it says, well, John has financial knowledge, so that could be super helpful with our budgeting. Could be super helpful with our just financial reporting and just making sure that we're being responsible with our spending. John has a connection to the southern end of the district, so maybe you don't have a whole lot of representation from that part of the district. And John is organized, which is incredibly helpful when having somebody that's going to be in charge of multiple projects or things with lots of moving parts. And then you're going to have your point of contact. So, who's the best person to approach John? Is it someone that already has a relationship with him, that has a similar business, that is located in a similar area? And that's Tony. And then thinking about the long-term relationship building for John. In month one, maybe you invite John to a mixer that the organization is having. Then maybe in month two, after you've met John, you invite John out for coffee to kind of have a conversation about John's business and maybe assess a potential interest in becoming more involved. And then if it seems like John's interested in month three, that's when maybe you could invite John to a board meeting to meet the board and see how the organization operates, and maybe have a drink afterwards to kind of answer questions John might have about being involved in the organization. Finally, in month four, that's when you might be comfortable enough to make that ask and get a positive response. So I'll send out this template after the meeting just so you can kind of have it as a way to kind of organize your prospects. You also want to make sure that you're passing the baton and not dropping it. So, as existing board members or staffers at your organization, you want to help board members learn and feel comfortable in their roles. And why that job description is so important. And by having information about the organization, whether it's a trifold or something that you can give to them to help them learn about the history of the organization, how it operates. It's really up to the staff and the existing board members to be a coach and a mentor and advisor to new and prospective board members. And a great way to do this is to pair veteran board members with the rookies. So have a situation where maybe once a month, a new board member and a long-standing board member get together for coffee and just talk about the district, talk about where do they feel uncomfortable, where do they feel like they need more information. Maybe they could have a specific interest that you could help them plug into the organization more. If they have a skill set that they're not currently being taken advantage of, how can that be worked out? You also want to help board members understand the district, their role, and how they can be effective, and help them understand the organization's history, but focus on the future. And a lot of that has to do with board training. So every year, right after your annual meeting, you should think about doing a board orientation for the whole group. So, a refresher for the existing board members, and really a lot of crucial information for the existing board members. Everybody needs to know what their legal responsibilities are as a board member. What are the expectations of being a board member? So, attending meetings, serving on a committee, it could be other working board activities outside of meetings, how many hours a month are required for this role. What's your association do and how is it done? And don't assume that other board experience translates just because nonprofits are all different and a business association is very specific. So they may have had experience volunteering on other organizations, but don't assume that that's going to help them to get comfortable in this role quickly. Provide them with the information that they need. Be available to answer questions so they feel comfortable and confident in their role. So looking here is a example of a board member job description, and I have a template that I'll send over. If you don't already have something like this is incredibly helpful to send out to prospective board members, just so you're setting those expectations about what is expected of them as a volunteer. And it says here, in addition to attendance, board members prepare for and participate at board meetings and serve on at least one committee. They set policies and provide input on strategic planning. They approve the budget and provide fiduciary oversight, abide by generally established legal nonprofit board duties, positively and proactively represent the association in the business district throughout the community, and make board membership one of your top volunteer priorities. So, attending events, participating in membership drives and other board-driven activities, supporting the events throughout the year. Board members also act as representatives of their business, so responsible for sharing information between their business and the business district. So that's reporting on what the district is doing to the business, requesting and sharing information from the business, including needs, challenges, suggestions, and questions. And that's a really big one too, is, performing regular outreach to the businesses in the district to kind of gauge, what are they struggling with? What would be beneficial to them as an organization? So you can kind of pivot from year to year to address those needs and challenges. You also want to tap into surveying when would be the best time to meet. A lot of different types of businesses have preferences in this regard. A bar and restaurant that's open late might not be able to make those early morning meetings. They might prefer something in the afternoon. Other types of service businesses that start early might not be able to make those early morning meetings. So surveying those members to make sure that you can get the greatest attendance is really going to help with your recruitment as well. Also, a couple other things to keep on your radar to make sure that your board members are comfortable and confident is directors and officers insurance. Does your district have it? If not, I highly recommend it. It is not super cheap. It should be somewhere in the $1,000 to $2,000 a year range. But if anything happens to the organization where the organization is sued, this will help to protect the board members and their businesses from any legal repercussions. You also want to make sure you have policies in place to point to if there's any wrongdoing or inappropriate behavior. This is your anti-harassment policy, your whistleblower policy, things of that nature. And we have templates of these as well, making sure that all board members sign these policies and read them just so they understand the proper channels for reporting inappropriate behavior and how they're expected to act. And ground rules are also really important. So this is for meeting ground rules, establishing specific things that are appropriate and inappropriate in meetings, just so everybody's on the same page about how people should be behaving. And if someone is acting out of line, you have something specific to point to say this is against our ground rules. You also want to delegate board members responsible for identifying and connecting with future prospects. So, a lot of districts will have their vice president solely in charge of chairing a board development or a nominating committee. And that committee is specifically tasked with developing relationships with potential board members, having these conversations with board members, making sure that they are aware of their responsibilities, and making sure that they are kind of in that leadership pipeline, ready to be voted onto the board by the time your annual meeting rolls around. Also set term limits and plan for transition. So as I said, it's great to have a super volunteer that is willing to dedicate years and years of time to a leadership role. But when you don't have a limit on their term, you kind of get stuck in a situation where an individual might not have the experience or ideas to appropriately lead the organization at the current time. They may have had it 5, 10 years ago, but it's important to get that new energy in, those new ideas to help to not only make sure that the organization is relevant, but to lead to additional recruitment. New people on the board will lead to more relationships that you can capitalize on when you're recruiting. And then finally, you want to make sure you celebrate your volunteers. So when a project gets finished, you want to make sure that you're doing appropriate volunteer recognition of people's hard work because they don't have to be here. They have limited time. So it always feels nice to be told that you've done a good job and your efforts are appreciated. Okay. So once you've got your board together, you want to keep them. And board retention has a lot of different pieces, but a really big piece of board retention is making the most out of your meetings. Making sure that you're spending people's time efficiently. They feel like their time is not being wasted in a meeting that's too long or ineffective or pointless. So there are certain things you can do to make your meetings more effective. And number one is always creating an agenda for every meeting, every board meeting. It's the president's job to design the agenda for the meeting, but it can be a collaborative effort between the executive committee and staff to kind of identify what are the priorities that we want to focus on in order to do what we set out to do in our work plan for the following month or 2 or 3 months. Make sure you have start and end times for each item, just so you can kind of keep track of where you're at in the agenda as compared to what time it is. You don't want to go over time and run out of time to focus on things that are super important. Also, identify what decisions need to be made and what is purely informational. So, for instance, your minutes from the prior meeting need to be approved at the next meeting. So that should go really at the top of the agenda because that is something that needs to be voted on. Then your financials, that should be something that gets shared every board meeting, but doesn't need to be approved, right? That's just informational to present to the board, to give the board an opportunity to ask questions about the financial statements. And then you've got events and marketing. That's more of a discussion, right? That gives people a chance to weigh in on upcoming activities. And then, of course, you always want to make time to vote in new board members, and that requires approval. So making sure to add that to the agenda as that comes up. You also want to give notice for your meetings. So give people a heads up. And a lot of the times, reminders are standard practice and required by your bylaws. So definitely check your bylaws to see if there's any language in it about how far in advance board members need to be alerted of when a board meeting is. It's super helpful to create an annual calendar of meetings to send out at the beginning of the year, just so people can kind of map out their calendars to help to ensure attendance. Because even if your bylaws say that you only need to give a week or two notice for your meetings, giving 3, 4, 5, 6 months notice is really helpful as people, are planning vacations or being out of town or unavailable. The further ahead you can give them the information, the better attendance you're going to have at your meetings. You also want to send, with these reminders, uh, send the agenda for the upcoming meeting, the draft minutes from the prior meeting, and then other key reports or materials with the meeting reminder. So that could be anything from the financial statements to a draft of a work plan or anything that the board might need to have time to review before the meeting, just so they can prepare questions and make the most of time so you're not spent reviewing materials in the meeting. You want to be prepared for meetings. So that includes soliciting RSVPs to make sure that you've got a quorum. And again, check your bylaws to to see how many board members you need in the room to have a quorum. Because if you don't have a quorum, oftentimes there's no point in meeting because you can't vote. So check guidelines, check your bylaws for guidance on that, as well as absences. So a lot of boards will have a clause where if someone has 3 unexcused absences, then they are assumed to have stepped off the board. I think it's fine to have absences. People get busy, things come up, but there has to be communication, right? People need to be communicating because if they're not showing up and you're having the meeting and there's no quorum, it's wasting people's time. So you want to have people in the room that want to be there. If you're meeting in person, make sure you're bringing the appropriate materials to the meeting. So copies of the agenda, the minutes, the financial reports, just so people can have hard copies to review if needed, if they don't have it on their phone or a laptop or whatnot. And then make sure you take notes on meeting materials to reference while writing the minutes. Okay, so during the meeting, a lot of the times it's helpful to start with an icebreaker, especially if you've got new folks in the room, a round of introductions, but also maybe an activity to help people to get more comfortable, talking about something non-business related, something personal that they can share about themselves to help them get to know each other. And then after the icebreaker, it's the president's job to follow that agenda and stay on track and implement good governance during the meeting. So, making sure to vote when voting is needed, following those meeting ground rules to make sure no one is talking out of line, being inappropriate. So, keep those bylaws handy as well. Because depending on the conversations you're having, different decisions might require different vote thresholds, whether it's a majority or 2/3 or whatnot. Always stick to the agenda. Keep track of motions, seconds, and votes. So individual names of people who are making motions, seconds, that sort of thing. And be respectful of people's time. Don't drag the meeting out. going over the allotted times, um, and always at some point in the agenda provide opportunities for attendees to share info about their business. Do they have a sale coming up? Are they doing an event? Are changes happening to their business? It's a good opportunity and a benefit for them to be able to get this information out to a group. Always think about meetings as being fun and not a chore. Take into consideration meeting location, meeting time, and not necessarily, focusing just on business, but how can this be a social opportunity as well? So one thing you may run into with groups of people with strong personalities, diverse groups, you may run into individuals expressing tough behaviors. And here's just a couple of types of people that you might encounter and how to respond to behavior that might, if unchecked, derail the meeting. So, the first one is the naysayer. That's the individual who is always being negative, complaining about how things don't work, but don't offer any solutions. With this individual, you want to make sure that you're repeating back their concerns so they know they've been heard. A lot of the times, the most important thing in a meeting like this is making sure people feel heard. So that could be, yeah, just repeating back to them, writing them down, but also shifting the conversation to others in the room to seek alternative viewpoints. Because a lot of the times, if you're able to bring someone else into the conversation that can provide a positive outlook, that helps to balance out the naysayer. You also have the rambler, who sometimes goes on and kind of sucks up all the energy in the room and runs over time. And, as a leader of the meeting, you want to make sure you always interrupt them, bring them to their point, and you could even establish time limits on comments or use a round robin format to make sure that individuals know that everybody needs to have a chance to provide input. The tangent is very similar to the rambler, someone that's going on and on. And again, it's the same strategy. You're interrupting the tangents and using a tool called the parking lot, which is, making sure that they're being heard and then saying, we're going to put this in the parking lot, which is essentially just taking that topic and saving it for later in the event that there's time. If the tangent is important, get the group buy-in to shift the agenda. So if there is something that other people seem like they are feeling needs to be discussed right away, make sure that they are able to speak up and tell you, just so you can shift that agenda item. Otherwise, put it in the parking lot. You may run into the attacker, and this is somebody who is being inappropriate with how they're responding to another board member's comments. If they're being attacked personally, this should be something that's in your ground rules about being respectful to your fellow board members. Just so if this does happen, you can say, this is going against our ground rules. We need to be if we're disagreeing with each other, we need to be respectfully disagreeing. Any type of rudeness or personal attacks, interrupt those immediately because that's going to be a huge turnoff, especially for someone new on the board, about them sharing their thoughts or even coming to a meeting. No one wants to be subjected to that type of behavior as a volunteer, right? So making sure people feel safe in these spaces is incredibly important. The interrupter is essentially, yeah, the same as the attacker. If someone is interrupting another person while they're speaking, this should be also in your ground rules. It's okay to interrupt the interruption. Keep a list of who has the floor and in what order. If you've got a heated conversation going, make sure people are raising their hands, and as the facilitator of the meeting, make sure you're keeping track of who's next in the order. And then the opposite of these is the mouse. And that's the person who isn't comfortable speaking up for whatever reason. And a lot of the times, this type of person needs to be addressed directly. The facilitator should seek their opinions and encourage them to participate. And this is why prep time is so important. Giving the information before the meeting so they have time to think through what their thoughts are. Some people just aren't as comfortable in a group setting, sharing their thoughts or speaking up. So this is where the round robin format also comes in handy. Okay, so I've been talking for quite a bit. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just see if you all have any questions about anything that was discussed or have an issue in your district at the moment that you'd like to kind of share with the group and workshop. I know it's a lot of information, and I will be sending a follow-up email with some of the resources that you can kind of look over and share with your boards to kind of start coming up with a strategy for recruitment. So definitely keep a lookout for that.
I have I have one question. This is Barb from the SMBA, South Moreland.
Yeah, hi Barb, how are you?
I'm well. I wasn't prepared for the video, so I'll just do voice.
Yeah, no
Um,
problem.
I came on a couple minutes late, but I just wanted to ask, we were talking about when we want to do elections, and we kind of reformed our board at one time. So we all started, a year and a half ago. So the question of like turnover and not, wiping the slate totally clean versus, slowly, sorry, my cat's joining it. Versus adding people as we go. Is there any? It seemed like you were talking about getting people kind of primed in the pump and getting them involved and then doing an annual election versus adding people as we feel.
Yeah, it really just depends on your bylaws. The recruitment piece should be a year-round process where you're developing relationships throughout the year, not just, waiting to, the 2 or 3 months before the annual meeting to do that. Um,
Okay.
but, in your bylaws, it will say, the maximum amount of people that can serve on the board and the minimum amount of people that can serve on the board. So making sure that you're still kind of in that range with your bylaws,
Yeah.
and that's if you're falling below what's required in your bylaws, that's when you want
Uh-huh.
to focus on doing a vote to get someone back on the board to make you in compliance with the bylaws. But we've
Okay.
always found, as
Mhm.
long as you're in compliance with your bylaws, having a annual meeting to elect that board is usually the best way to go. You don't want full turnover on your board. You want to keep some of those people with that institutional knowledge, keep them in the loop.
Right.
And then bring on some new energy, some new ideas. So a lot of the times it's like a 50-50 split when you're doing your annual meeting, and then you're adding people throughout the year as other people have to drop off, whether it's they decided, oh, this is too much of a time commitment for me, or my business is moving, so it doesn't make sense for me to be on the board. As those things happen, yeah, you can see who's ready to officially be voted on, and that can kind of happen throughout the year. But the bulk of it should happen at that annual meeting.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions about recruitment or meetings or
I have a quick
difficult
question.
personalities?
Sorry, it's loud in here. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I have a quick question. We just voted to change when we do our annual voting
yeah.
for officers from May to August. And we're looking at our, going through our bylaws and adjusting the language there. Do you see any issue with changing the month, the time of year that you that a board typically does it. Um,
You
I
know,
mean,
all
one thing we thought about was our membership dues. So we're also looking at changing how we approach that as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of districts do it at different times throughout the year, and it is worth being strategic about because I know at Venture Portland, our annual meeting is in April, and that's really because we've got our grants program that's in the spring. So our the grants are essentially the incentive for the associations to join Venture Portland. And then by the time those grants are done, we have a pretty good idea of who's a member and who's not. And at that point, we know from that group who could potentially serve on the board. So a lot of the times it's timed around programming. If someone wants to participate in something, the annual meeting should be after, that big thing that draws everybody to your organization, just so you know what the full extent of your membership is before having that vote. Because, generally they have to be a member to be a board member. And they're not going to join until there's something happening that is kind of influencing them to join. So moving it to August, I think, is a really great idea because, they have to join to participate in the street fair. And then by the time the street fair is over, okay, here's our membership. So here's who we can kind of nominate to be on that board. So I think that makes sense, but it's entirely up to the board whether when they want to do it. But from what I know about HMBA, that sounds like it makes sense to me. It would make a whole lot of sense, a lot more sense than having the annual meeting before the street fair.
Thank you.
Quick question before we dive into personalities.
Yeah.
When is a vote a simple board vote versus a full membership vote? I'm going to shoot off 5 ideas to you. You just give me your casual answer to it, knowing that each of us have our own bylaws that we have to go back and refer to. But just in general, whether our bylaws say it or not, sure, give me your thoughts really quick.
Okay.
Bylaw changes, simple board vote or full on, you have to get those out to your membership and you need to take the time to get everybody's vote in on it.
I think, bylaws really are a board issue, right? I don't know if a member would have the background information to be able to um, vote on something like that. I think that should be an internal discussion with the board.
Uh, then that might be the template for everything because next is budgets.
Yeah, right, right. Um, I think that's the same situation. Your members really should only be the ones who elect the board. They're entrusting, when they vote for the board, they're entrusting that board to make decisions around bylaws and financials and programming. Um, and if they want to be more involved, they have to join the board, right? Um, I think that's kind of the structure that most business associations follow, where it's a member gets benefits through the programming of the association, but doesn't actually have say in the day-to-day operations of the organization, aside
Yeah.
from who's making those day-to-day decisions.
Minus the fact that they have the capacity to ask for those bylaws at any point in time because they pay into an association that gives them the access to know what's actually happening.
They do, yes, yes, you
Yeah.
would have to send them
Well,
the bylaws,
yeah.
but if they are interested in making changes to the bylaws, they would have to join the board.
Yeah, I think that first idea of the template, because that runs through my other ones, which is voting the board, formation of committees, what initiatives are we going after, this, that, and the other. Yeah, that makes sense that the board itself is going to do the work of piloting the ship. If anybody that isn't on that ship wants to have a say, they need to get on that ship. So,
Yeah, yeah. Otherwise, you
mm,
get a situation where there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and
yeah.
the cooks don't have all the ingredients they need to make, their dishes, right? So it's yeah. I think that's
Cool.
that's the best practice.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
Does anybody else struggle with strong personalities and arguments on their boards?
You don't have to name names, but
You don't have to name names. I just
I'm
mostly
sure
want to
it's
ask
it's
how are you
inevitable,
how
right?
are you all addressing those? Because I mean I go through that and I'm working on how I myself don't allow myself to become agitated. I'm just gonna admit I literally went through this last 2 months having somebody trigger a lot of harder things in me because of their approach. And as the president, we don't have to be perfect. I can be humble enough to admit when I handled something wrong, but I also need to be in a position where I could tell him to just sit the fuck down and step and just you have to like literally I became a junior high boy defending himself again. And then I was called the bully for doing so. And I stepped back and be like, yeah, I was aggressive on that. I would love to have not been aggressive, but I really needed to be able to put him in his place. So if anybody has anything that they're doing to be able to handle situations like that, it's just I would take all the help in the world. So yeah.
Christopher, I'd love to get together with you sometime.
Yeah, as president, that just kind of comes with the territory, right? You're the individual that has to have those difficult conversations, and a lot of people don't respond to criticism very well. So I think it's inevitable for that to happen. I think the most important thing in situations like this is not to make it personal, right? And that's where those meeting ground rules and the bylaws and the policies and procedures really come into play. Because if you can point to say to one of those documents and say, this is part of the organization's against our meeting ground rules or against our organization's policies, it's shifting the accusation from you to saying, I'm just following the rules. I didn't make the rules, but as president, I have to enforce the rules. So it's kind of avoiding them taking it as a personal attack from you. If you have a document to point to that they've seen and they've signed to say, you saw this document. This is against the rules in the document. I'm sorry, but whatever it ends up being, whether it's, you have to step down or whatever it might be. It just kind of takes some of the burden off you.
This is Barbara again, still not on camera. I think the awkward thing is bringing it up, and especially when it's a personality situation. It's a person. So I actually think maybe reviewing what the personality, how we deal with personalities that you presented here just a minute ago, and sort of not pointedly to anyone, and just here's what I learned in my meeting to the board, and sort of resetting everything based on that is a good excuse to kind of reset everyone's ground rules if it hasn't been, if you're not a super formal, here's our bylaws every meeting. I think that might be a good way to, oh, we're going to table that. Oh, thank you, we've been heard. Now let's hear from other people. A good excuse to bring it up because that's always the awkward thing. How do we establish these new things once things have started to go awry? So anyway, great tips. And I think using this as a moment to reset things is great.
That's a great point, Barb. Yeah, yeah, just saying, hey, I attended this meeting. Here's what I learned. It's a great way to kind of start that conversation without, making it seem like it's coming out of the blue. Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to send out some resources, like I said. So when you receive that, if you have any questions about anything there, feel free to reach out to me, and I can kind of help to clarify, or we can do conversation if there's a specific issue that you want to speak about in private. That's fine too. But yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Jacob.
guys.
Thank you.